There are a number of radical skeptics today, who claim that Jesus did not exist, or they seriously doubt his existence. However, there are a number of critical problems with doubting Jesus' existence due to the early and abundant evidence that we have of Jesus' life and deeds. In fact, there is almost unanimous consent among critical scholars today that Jesus existed. Historical textual evidence for Jesus' existence. There are over 46 sources within 150 years after Jesus' death, which mention his existence and record many events of his life. 1. 9 traditional New Testament authors. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, author of Hebrews, James, Peter, and Jude. 2. 20 early Christian writers outside the New Testament. Clement of Rome, 2 Clement, Ignatius, Polycarp, Martyrdom of Polycarp, Didache, Barnabas, Shepherd of Hermas, Fragments of Papias, Justin Martyr, Aristides, Athenagoras, Theophilus of Antioch, Quadratus, Aristo of Pella, Melito of Sardis, Dionysius, Gospel of Peter, Apocalypse of Peter, and Epistula Apostolorum. 3. 4 heretical writings. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Truth, Apocryphon of John, and Treatise on Resurrection. 4. 13 secular sources. Thallus is perhaps the earliest secular writer to mention Jesus, and he is so ancient that his writings don't even exist anymore. But Julius Africanus, writing around 221 AD, does quote Thallus, who had previously tried to explain away the darkness that occurred at the point of Jesus' crucifixion. On the whole world there pressed a most fearful darkness, and the rocks were rent by an earthquake, and many places in Judea and other districts were thrown down. This darkness Thallus, in the 3rd book of his history, calls, as appears to me without reason, an eclipse of the sun. If only more of Thallus' record could be found, we would see that every aspect of Jesus' life could be verified with a non-biblical source. But there are some things we can conclude from this account. Jesus lived, he was crucified, and there was an earthquake and darkness at the point of his crucifixion. Flavius Josephus 37 AD to post 100, is the most famous Jewish historian, records some interesting comments about Jesus and James, the half-brother of Jesus. We quote from his book Jewish Antiquities. His second major work Jewish Wars is the first, written in the early 90s. The first passage has sparked controversy, because it is widely believed that a Christian scribe inserted some clauses. But here is an expurgated version. Around this time lived Jesus, a wise man. For he was a worker of amazing deeds, and was a teacher of people, who gladly accept the truth. He won over both many Jews and many Greeks. Pilate, when he heard him accused by the leading men among us, condemned him to the cross, but those who have first loved him did not cease doing so. To this day the tribe of Christians named after him has not disappeared. Scholars agree that Josephus wrote a passage on Jesus. Most scholars would agree on this restored version. When they don't agree, they usually make Josephus a little more hostile. This excerpt corroborates some elements in the Gospels. Specifically, Jesus was a wise man, though the Gospels do not use that description in those exact terms. He worked amazing deeds. He was a teacher. He won over many Jews. Leading men accused him. Pilate had him crucified. His followers did not cease loving him. They continue up to the time of Josephus, who was writing in Rome, where a Christian community flourished. As for the observation that Jesus won over many Greeks or Gentiles, Josephus was simply retrofitting his present day with the ministry of Jesus, for the Gospels say Jesus' outreach to Greeks or Gentiles was minimal. But one thing is certain, Josephus does not doubt that Jesus existed. Van Voorst writes, the excerpt affirms the existence of Jesus. If any Jewish writer were ever in a position to know about the non-existence of Jesus, it would have been Josephus. His implicit affirmation of the existence of Jesus has been, and still is, the most significant obstacle for those who argue that extra-biblical evidence is not probative on this point. p. 99. Josephus was a careful enough historian to have noted whether the Jesus movement had been built on a fraud, on a zero, on a nothing, on the complete absence of a real person. Josephus could have written, "The followers of this non-existent Jesus say he existed, but no one ever saw or heard him." But Josephus didn't write that. Next, Josephus recounts the execution of James, the half-brother of Jesus. Josephus intends Ananias the high priest in Jerusalem to appear bad, because the Romans replaced him. Since Ananias behaved rashly, the Romans were justified in their policy. Ananias the high priest assembled the Sanhedrin of judges, and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions, and when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. See Jewish Antiquities 20.9.1. The majority of scholars agree that this passage is authentic, without interpolations. Josephus recognized that James the half-brother of Jesus was an important leader of a new religious movement, earliest Christianity in Jerusalem, important enough for Josephus to recall his name and execution. His passage indeed corroborates the Gospels because some verses mention James as the Lord's half-brother, Matt 13:55 and Mark 6:3.